Good evening, one and all. This is James. Thank you so much for joining me. As always, I'm sort of humbled on these occasions by the number of people and the colleagues who give up Wednesday evenings to take part in these sorts of events. So it really genuinely is appreciated. We've got a really good audience in this evening. And actually, on that note, I mean, we've got some really good people in. All of you are good people. We've got some really good people in the session this evening. I spotted Graham Chesterman's in this evening. We had a brief chat earlier. Graham, hope you're well. Nice to see you in here. I also noticed Emma Frost, who I met recently over at KA. It's good to see you in here as well. Andy Guest up at Yarm, good to see you as well, Andy. Hope you're keeping well. I noticed that Stuart Maddox in from Millfield as well, who I keep in touch with on a regular basis. And there's a few other people in here and some familiar names and some not so familiar, which is nice too. Look, the way this is going to work is that I'm going to present some ideas to you within this session. I don't consider myself to be any more of an authority on any of the exam boards than potentially anyone else who's in the session this evening. I guess the only difference is that I spent a little bit of time thinking about this and what I'd like to say, and also how I'd like to support people through this session this evening and as an ongoing conversation. I don't for a second believe that what I'm going to tell you now is a definitive version of everything you need to know about the draft specifications. I don't believe that I can advise you on the best one for you to take up for your own school. But what I do think we can do is we can look at some key features and maybe start to think about some key aspects of the decision so people feel better supported. On that note, I've put my email address just in here, look, james@mypeexam.org. If there are things that get highlighted this evening that you would like to discuss with me on a sort of a more individual basis, then do afterwards feel free to get in touch with me there. Also, you'll notice within the webinar room that there's an opportunity for a chat, and you can type a comment into that chat box and it will be posted so that everybody in the webinar this evening can see that. And I will be asking for questions to be posted, and I'll try and answer as many of them as I can do later on or throughout the session. Okay, so look, here's our agenda. We're going to go through processes and timescales, what I'm considering to be the main differentiators, maybe the key things that might be informers of the decisions that you guys need to make. We're going to look at NEA, or practical and coursework. We're going to have a look at the theory, and we're going to finish off with hopefully a good 10-15 minutes of questions and next steps. A couple of admin things. You notice over here that I've put a couple of QR codes. There's QR code 1 over here, and there's another one over here. Look, these are links to documents that I'm going to show on the screen during the course of this session. So if you do have a QR code reader, you can scan them like that. Alternatively, I've put the links directly into the chat, and you can go and you can get to them from there. So go into the chat at the very top. I've included the links direct to those 2 documents that these refer to. Okay, so look, all that being said, let's actually make a start and let's have a go at this processes and timescales. And all this is really is an attempt at giving some practical information about some of the things that maybe you guys need to be aware of. Now, some of them I'm sure you know already. So key things that I want everyone to know that are absolutely essential points for me. Everything for all 4 exam boards at the moment is a draft. So there's currently draft information only for all exam boards. So if you are being sort of pressured into making a decision about which exam board you are to choose at this stage, I think you need to try and think about resisting that pressure. If you feel pressure sort of internally to know more and understand the differences, then that's part of being here tonight and reading and doing all of that research. But recognize, first of all, that everything we talk about tonight is a draft of what will later become an approved specification. Now then, from the exam board's perspective, we need to know that they are going through a process of resubmission. And what we mean by that is that all of the awarding bodies, they are making the requested changes that Ofqual are requesting of them and then resubmitting them to Ofqual. And I was speaking to a colleague at one of the awarding bodies yesterday, and they were saying to me that Ofqual guarantees a 40 working day turnaround. So it's a 40 working day turnaround for resubmission. So that is to say that, you know, if an awarding body was to resubmit their draft specification today, it could be 5 weeks, 40 working days. Sorry, what am I saying? It could be 8 weeks. Couldn't count there briefly. 40 working days, 8 weeks before that specification comes back, and obviously it might not be approved. There might be other changes actually requested of the awarding body. So I think that's really important to be aware of. And also, we can also say about resubmission, it's that ongoing process. Okay, so it could be that there's one of the specifications that's approved around about Christmas time into January, but there may be others that are significantly behind that. So I think we have to prepare ourselves for that. What I did see, and I noticed this particularly on Pearson or Edexcel, is that the awarding bodies are posting updates. Okay, so if you go onto any of the exam board, well, I believe any of the exam board websites, and look at the most recent version of the draft, it should show and actually have highlighted for you the differences, the changes they've made in order for them to go back for their resubmission. Now, I want to talk about this notion of resubmission, and I want us to think about, maybe want to address what we think are likely changes. So the things that are not likely to change from the information that I've been provided, so not likely to change, they are going to be things such as the theory content. The theory content appears at least to be quite set. It appears that it's not going to change. I'm not going to say there's going to be no change. I don't know that, but it looks like the theory content is going to experience marginal changes, if any. So theory is not going to change a great deal in terms of content. We can also say that things such as the exam time and structure, okay, so exam time, the length the exams are going to be, and the number of exams, for example, that doesn't look likely to change. We can also not expect changes for things like raw mark totals. Okay, so raw mark totals appear like they are not going to change. So what we mean by that is, if the exam board is saying that the specification will be out of, one of the exams will be out of 100 raw marks, then that looks likely that it's going to be set. So we shouldn't be expecting that to change. And for certain, what we cannot expect to change is the practical list. Okay, so this idea, we'll talk about this a little bit more in a moment, but the idea that officiating is gone and that performing and coaching has been narrowed down to a narrow range of practical activities, that is not going to change. So we can expect that to be the case. So on that basis, where might changes be likely? Where might there be changes? Okay. And I'm going to sort of try and pick out a couple of spots where I think changes are at least possible. The first one that I've sort of picked up on is marks from extended writing. So marks from extended writing. Now I'm going to, while I talk about this, I will come onto the screen ever so briefly just now. So I'll actually get to say hello to you for a moment. Hello all, it's nice to see you. I'm James. How are you doing? I am going to show you another version of my screen just for a moment, so just bear with me a second. I'm going to show you what I actually mean with regard to this extended writing, so just bear with me a moment. We're just going to have a look at this document. I know a lot of you have linked onto it, which is good. If we look at this document a second, which I would encourage you to have a look at because it's quite useful anyway. If we just scan down here, there's a row down here which says row 24, the number of raw marks from extended answers. And we can see that AQA in their SAMs, in their sample assessment materials, have put in 90 raw marks from extended writing. Pearson and Edexcel are up at 124. OCR way down at 40 marks from extended writing across their papers, and Educast WJC are at 70 marks. Now, having spoken to one colleague, Pearson, recently, they were saying that one of the things that their specification has been actually praised for is that number there, the number of marks from extended writing. So I think, is it therefore reasonable to assume that if Ofqual are praising a specification with 124 marks from extended writing, then I think we can expect that something like the 40 marks from OCR may change from extended writing. So we might see some changes in areas such as that. And the other point I wanted to make with you, to you about possible changes is that we might get very specific changes. I'm just going to come back onto the screen ever so briefly. Just bear with me a second. That didn't work. So we might get very specific changes in the statements that actually exist within the level descriptors and bandings. And I think that may be particularly the case for something like extended writing. So extended writing banding descriptors may change in scale. So the exam board might say, okay, well, we thought that the top banding was going to be worth 3 marks and the next one 3. Those might change a little bit, so we might expect some changes there. But other than that, we're not expecting a really significant degree of change within these draft specifications. So on that basis, we can make a good comparison. We can start to think, okay, well, these drafts seem at least reasonably reliable in the majority of their structure and content. Therefore, we can make, hopefully, a good comparison between them. All right, I'm just going to go back to the black screen just so we can finish off our start point. So hopefully you'll be able to see that right now. So last point on this, I mentioned just a moment ago the date of sort of Christmas, January. It is sort of what I can pick up, at least, that we might be expecting January to be the first approval of the first specification. Now, I'm not saying it won't be December, or it could be, right? It could be just before Christmas, but January might be the first approval. That might be where we're looking at. But based on what I just said, that the drafts seem at least quite reliable in the majority of their structure and content, then of course maybe we can go a bit further with our consideration and our planning anyway. I would say as well that, again, I'm moving a little bit into my personal opinion on this one, that where we as a group of teachers and as heads of department, as A-level teachers, where we have got a major decision to make, where we have all got a major decision to make is in teaching structure. So for us, I think one of the things we have to think about really clearly and understand the specification, therefore, to be able to do this, is to understand what we want to do as a teaching structure or as a delivery structure. And I'm going to talk quite a bit about that this evening, and maybe where my feelings lie with that. You know, whether, for example, you know, we put all students into the AS examinations in 2017, whether we do it as a mock, how we plan, for example, for the practical type lesson, how we embed theory and practical. All those sorts of considerations I'm going to talk to you a little bit about this evening, but I really do think that that's a really significant decision that we need to make. Okay, so look, there are processes and timescales and perhaps some of the things we need to know structurally before we go any further. But beyond that, and for me, perhaps the most important aspect of what we're going to do this evening is we need to think about the main differentiators for the specifications in general. Where do our decisions lie? How can we actually look at these specifications and say, right, that one's different to that one because, and these are the factors that I at least can calculate are the biggest things for you to actually consider. So I've looked at one in relation to theory first of all, and I think that the biggest difference in theory comes in the performance analysis and biomechanics aspect of the theory. There is really little doubt that OCR is significantly weightier, OCR greater on the biomechanical side. So if you are in a center which is strong on biomechanics, has a strong history of doing that, then I think that OCR needs to be at least praised for the fact that they've kept that in. They've even developed some ideas from their previous course as well. And certainly the biomechanics side of OCR is deeper than it is for the other qualifications. Now, interestingly, the other qualifications believe that's a strength of theirs as well, that students and teachers aren't expected to go as deeply into that biomechanics. Now, of course, that depends, I guess, on your background and your experiences, and people will make different decisions on that. But that is certainly a difference. OCR has gone a bit further with that biomechanical sort of content. Other things that I think are really important, I'm going to mention another theory one straight away, is the idea of what we're going to call sort of embedded teaching of theory. And what I mean by this is that there is a claim, at least, and we are the people who've got to judge whether this claim is a reasonable and fair one. There is a claim, at least, by OCR and Edexcel. They believe and are pushing the idea that their theory is more practical. Now, I'm not saying it is or it isn't. I know what they're trying to say. If you look at the content list that they have distributed, it does look as if there's more opportunity to teach more theory in the practical context with OCR and Pearson. So let me just note that in there. So we're talking there about OCR and we're talking about Pearson. So they at least have started from the perspective that theory doesn't have to be sat behind desks in rows in a classroom. So I think that's a good start point. Now, whether that is whether AQA and Educast or WJC haven't achieved that, I'm not here to say. But certainly OCR and Pearson believe and are advocating that this is the case with their specification. So I think it's something that colleagues need to think about, and think about whether they can structure their delivery for this embedded teaching by having having practical spaces available during theory lessons, for example. I know it's pretty common stuff, but I just wanted to raise it as a possibility. So on that basis, and the emphasis of what I'm going to write here is on the word might, AQA and EDUCAS, and EDUCAS, by the way, is the new name for the WJC, might be more classroom. Now, I'm not saying I am certain about that, but that's certainly what the other two are claiming with regard to there. So is it the case that AQA and EDUCAS is more theoretical, more classroom desky type experience? It's for us to decide, but that's part of the consideration that perhaps us guys need to be thinking about and making. Other things that I would suggest to you are key differentiators. I really encourage colleagues to go and have a look at the sample assessment materials, the SAMs. Okay, that is really important, I think. And as we said before, this is unlikely to change. So if there's a feature of one of the exam papers, sample exam papers, one of the sample mark schemes that you like over others, I think that is one of the key places for you to go and have a look at. Now, I think it's fair to say that in the majority of the awarding bodies, there hasn't been a big turnover of people who are actually writing these specifications and exam papers. So therefore, if you are working with OCR, you are working with AQA, you are working with Excel, you probably find things to be at least reasonably familiar, I think. And therefore, I really think people need to get into those SAMs. Now, there's a lot of material in there. I have to say I was a little bit disappointed with the WJC material for the sample assessment. So for me, there's less information to go on there, but it's definitely worth getting in there and having a look at those sort of considerations. Other differentiators for me, and actually I've spoken to a lot of people who believe this is the main differentiator. You've certainly got to be thinking about the coursework. And when I say coursework, first of all, I'm talking about not the practical aspect of the NEA, the non-assessment, the non-examination assessment, but I'm talking about either the written or the verbal feedback. So a couple of key things I would say is that, first of all, AQA and OCR are allowing verbal feedback. So OCR and AQA have a verbal, at least, option for their feedback. AQA I found really interesting because on the AQA coursework, you can either write it, you can speak it verbally, or you can sort of do a bit of both. Now that sort of lends itself to like some sort of notion of presentation, you know, doing some kind of, you know, you've got some kind of electronic presentation and then you speak that when you're ready to deliver it, which I thought was quite an interesting concept. Another point that, and on the other side, we've got Pearson, and we've got EDUCAS. I'm going to write WJC this time just to confuse you. WJC and Pearson, that is a written piece of coursework. So they're not only different because of that, they're also significantly different with regard to the content as well. Okay, so you need to have a think, you need to have a good look at those things. But OCR have certainly considered with their, continued with their sort of EPPA type structure, though they're calling it EAPI within this, just to confuse us. But that's very much a continuation. The AQA one has become very interesting again, because the AQA one, they are having area of assessment 1, which is actually can be assessed in the AS course, and area assessment 2 and 3 can be assessed in additionally in the A-level course. So it does allow you to that structure of co-teaching within it. With Pearson, you know, you're looking at they're sort of quoting like a 54 hours worth of preparation to get that piece of coursework up to scratch. And both Pearson and WJC make reference to word counts because theirs are written profiles. Okay, so those are things that I would be thinking about. And my final point on main differentiators is that there are differences on specific theory content. Now, I want to be clear here. That was meant to be an O. I want to be clear here. The theory descriptors provided by the DFE were obviously standardized, and the real differences on the theory content come in the depth that have been provided or that have been published from the different exam boards. And this is an example, this biomechanics example is probably the best one, but there's also quite significant differences in that societal stuff. So if you have a comparison of the societal content as well, you will see some quite big differences. And on that note, I'm just going to introduce you to the other document, which I've just going to share with you one more thing. Just bear with me a second. I do want to show you this document here again. This is the QR code is on The QR code is on the presentation screen I showed you earlier, but also the links are in the chat. You can actually see here, and by the way, just ignore the colors. This is just a document that I'm working from for my own purposes. But you can see here, I'm just going to click onto the OCR course here. You can see the specific topics that OCR are going to be requiring their students to be answering questions on, and there are some quite significant differences. You'll also note, and we talked about this last time when we did the GCSE comparison stuff, but of course there are some quite significant differences in the sense that a lot of the previous material has gone down to the GCSE course, and as a result of that we've got some new content added in, and I would encourage you to have a scan across that and have a good look. All right, so I'm just going to come back into the room and see if there's questions that people are asking. I'll try my best to do that as well as I can. Okay, where are we? All right, so I'm just having a look for any questions. Nothing major there. So if people want to put questions in, Andrew Ricard, at least 2 new writers for Excel in terms of SAMs. Okay, that's interesting. Thanks for that, Andrew. That's really useful. So we're saying that there's a significant difference with the colleagues who are writing the papers with Excel. That certainly isn't the case with OCR and AQA, but interesting to hear that. Andrew, spreadsheet says OCR is written feedback only. I'm not sure what you mean by written feedback. Do you mean the coursework? No, OCR coursework. I don't know if I'm just wondering if you're on the GCSE tab maybe rather than the A-level tab, possibly, Andrew. But no, the OCR coursework is definitely verbal. Okay, so be aware, just be aware of that. So it's verbal for OCR, and one of the things I'll say about any verbal coursework as well is that you have to record every single student that does that. Okay, so it's worth being aware of those things as well. Okay, so I'm going to go back to the black screen. I already feel like we're stretched for time, so I'm going to crack on a little bit here. So what I want to do with you guys now is I want to have a look at the NEA. So by NEA, we're talking about non-examination assessment, which I personally think should just be NA. But anyway, that's where we are. So for the main points, first of all, over here, I'm going to talk a little bit about practical. Okay, so this is about practical and practical assessment of performance or coaching. The first thing is it's one activity. You guys will probably know that already. That second activity, which was previously assessed at AS, is gone, and that really explains why there's, where that additional theory content and requirement and rigor has actually come from. The exam boards have to write their practical as if it was equivalent to now. Okay, so in theory at least, the requirements of practical should be entirely standardized with the requirements of, with the standards of the courses now. So that we can't make an argument to say that, a student who would be getting 40 out of 40 on OCR now would only in the future get 35 or the equivalent. That's not the point. In theory, they should be equivalent. But the key thing I've been hearing about the assessment levels from the exam boards is that they're going to be razor sharp on the assessment actually meeting the level descriptors that they're going to put in place. So for me, that means that as teachers, we have got to have our students razor sharp prepared for the specific assessment criteria as set out in those specifications. So we've got to be working with students on that level. So when we talk about moderation, certainly for AQA and Pearson, that is going to be site-based. Okay, site-based. And the only time that your students are going to be required to produce video evidence is going to be during the moderation. So you will not be required as a centre to provide video, as I understand it, of your students playing football, playing rugby, tennis, whatever it happens to be, in preparation for moderation. But when they are moderated, that will be recorded and be a record of that moderation process. Of course, exceptions are going to be what we think about as off-site activities, such as skiing, for example, which will be required on video. Now, with regard to OCR, I believe there's at least still the conversation about there being cluster moderation. So I have heard some talk that those are going with OCR as well. So I guess we're going to have to wait and see on that one. So those are kind of the primary difference. I actually find that the practical is really similar. Really similar. You've got to get really down into the nitty-gritty of what is being assessed in the practical, and there are some little differences. So for example, with OCR are requiring that each student not only is assessed as a performer if they're doing performances, but they also need a log of their competitive participation over the course of the assessment period. That is a difference to other exam boards. Now that might You might see that as a benefit, you might see that as a drawback. Obviously, that's up to you. We can also see that there are differences in actually what's being assessed. AQA describe the fact that they are looking at core skills in fully competitive situations that are being assessed. AQA have perhaps done something quite clever, and they've said that the assessment at AS is exactly the same as the assessment at A level. Now, if that's the case, you could make an argument that once the assessment is done within the first year, it's done. Depends on where the student is in their performance level and whether they're improving, I guess, to give them the best opportunity. But we need to drill down into those differences a little bit. And then on the coursework side, let me just put this over here. On the coursework side, there's probably a few more substantial differences here. I've already talked about the verbal written differences. Okay, so verbal written. So we've got that possibility with, well, requirement with OCR, possibility with AQA that it can be done verbally. Remember what I said a moment ago, if it's a verbal assessment, it has to be recorded. So that's got a video requirement to it for people who are going in that direction. And we've got to look at the details of these different courseworks as well. So just a couple of things on that, a couple of things that I noticed that were perhaps really significant ones. I noticed that on the two written pieces with Pearson and with WJC, first of all, I mentioned earlier that you've got this kind of word count, which I think they're probably going to put in more as a maximum word count than a minimum, though they might have a minimum in there as well. But it's actually the content of the coursework which I think is particularly different. So if we look at, there's lots of sort of performance analysis, there's lots of action plans for improvement across them. I found that the AQA one is probably, maybe for me, the most interesting one, because they've stuck with their previous model, albeit it can be spoken, of their coursework where their students are assessing their own weaknesses from attacking, defending, and tactics and strategies. But interestingly, the student can actually write Area of Assessment 1 as part of their AS practical, and it can then be built up to their A level in year 2 with Area of Assessment 2 and 3. So I found that interesting. I also found interesting with AQA the fact that they've specified that when students are applying theory content to the coursework writing they're doing through their own weaknesses, they can either show the depth of their knowledge in one theory concept, or that they can show a range of knowledge across a range of theory concepts. So for me, that provided a notion of choice and individuality for student, or even for the centre, and how students can actually develop those sorts of ideas individually to themselves. So I thought that that was interesting, and I'm just going to write that in there as something that I would encourage people to have a little look into, because I thought that was quite clever, really, that they structured it that way. Now, centres who have been with AQA for a period of time, you probably know how onerous that piece of coursework was previously, and you need to be thinking about that. With EdXL, we've got to ask that they're quoting this notion of sort of 27 hours for their AS coursework, and they're talking about 54 hours with their A-level coursework. Does that mean that it's going to lend itself to a coursework lesson? Is there going to be a lesson throughout the year, half the year, which is specific to the coursework, whichever direction you happen to choose? And I think some centres will probably go in that direction. All right. In terms of best practice, I've really taken much longer than I thought I was going to do on these things, so I'm going to go a little bit faster, so we make sure we get to a decent point here. A couple of things that I want to talk generally speaking about the NEA and best practice. So I think the first thing is to think about the practical lesson. We're going to have, I think, far fewer students who have that kind of weak activity who are going to be heavily reliant on a practical lesson, that idea of having to get that second sport done, which we've done a lot with AS students currently, I think. So we've got to think really carefully about that practical lesson. Is that practical lesson becoming more of a coursework lesson? Is it about the student understanding what the requirements of the activity are? Is that practical lesson going to be more embedded into our theory teaching for theory exemplification and experimentation? And I think we need to think about that practical lesson in a lot of detail. Remember what I said a moment ago? Think about the video evidence at moderation. Okay, now I'm sure that centres are going to be the people who are going to be relied upon to do the videoing. So you're going to have to make sure you've got a strategy to make sure you've got good quality video evidence of the moderation process, so that if you do need to make an appeal or there is a disagreement, that you've got that in place. That's going to be something really important. This is kind of a bit of a personal one for me. We need within the practical a learning or development model, okay, not just an assessment model, development model. Okay, and what I mean by that is that students need to be enabled to understand the exact requirements that their coursework is going to, and their practical and their coursework is going to throw at them. And the students need opportunities to develop those specific skills. Now, a good level performer is probably going to be very well honed in core skills in competitive scenarios, but they need to understand very clinically how those level descriptors are going to be applied to them as a performer, and therefore they need to prepare for those. So I think there's a real process of discussion, of review, that teachers need to be going through with students on the practical to make sure that that practical comes out as the truest and fairest representation possible of the performer's practical performance level. So I think that's really important. So I think frequent review, ongoing conversations need to be had about how that practical is being built up. And this is the point I think we need to sort of get to as well. And I've mentioned this a couple of times. I think we need to seriously consider about making theory more practical. So, you know, that AQA coursework where students are relating theories to their weakness in performance, that should actually be informing the students' improvement within their practical skills. And I think that's important. So for me, there's two elements of making theory more practical. I think there's sort of a notion of experimentation, you know, so when there's a theory there that can be experimented with, that it is done so, and we know that students enjoy these sorts of experiences. And the other point I think is we need exemplification of theory through practice. Now, does that then mean that that is what our practical lesson becomes? I don't know. I'm not sure. I'm not telling you that is exactly how you want to do it, but you need to be thinking about that. All right, I'm going to crack on because time is much shorter than I meant it to be at this point. I'm going to change colours. We've done too much in green. With the theory, first of all, I know this will be worrying a lot of people out there. The idea here is that the theory is a completely equivalent qualification to now. Okay, so the idea is that the courses are equivalent to now, but of course, with that assessment going out of that second activity, those marks are brought across to the theory, and therefore the theory is much broader. So it's equivalent to now in theoretically, at least in terms of its rigor and challenge. But of course, what we've got is a much broader, set of ideas. And again, that sheet I've shown you with all of the theory content, go and have a look at that either now or later, and actually decide in your own mind how that structure of teaching and delivering, ensuring that students are mastering those concepts, is actually going to be done. And I'm also going to talk specifically about this breadth point at AS. The AS qualification is very broad in terms of theory. Now, I personally believe, this is only my individual opinion, I personally believe that wherever possible, students should be enabled to do their AS exam in year one of their A-level qualification. Now, I know there's limitations on funding. I know that there's a problem with the breadth of this theory delivery. So my question to people out there is, how can centres go about making sure that students are making the progress needed to hit this breadth of knowledge, to be able to have a good go at an exam at the end of year one? And I would say if funding is an issue in terms of putting students all through the AS qualification in year one, if funding does get in the way that, you know, you just don't want to, then I would say that we really need to be making sure that colleagues need to think seriously about making sure that students have a very rigorous examination experience within that first year, and maybe using those SAMs as mocks and various things to make sure that that actually happens. I also sort of want to highlight this. There is a consideration, I'm not sure how I feel about this, is that if a student is successful, excuse me, if a student is successful at AS, is that what's going to lead to the A level in year two? Okay, I'm just raising that. So does a student have to be successful at AS to make the transition to A level at A2? And I think a lot of people would answer that question as yes. But when we come back to this breadth point, you know, they're having to learn more, I think, in this qualification than perhaps we would expect of them currently within that first year, that AS year. Is it going to be reasonable to say that students have to get a so-and-so standard to get on to that A-level course when they're sort of already on it? So I'm going to get you to think about that one. I think I know what I would do in that situation, but I think it's worth thinking about. I think the other things to mention on the theory is that the 7 topic areas are standard. Okay, so there's 7 topic areas are standard. So all exam boards have really got standardized theory topic areas at least, but the big differences come in depth. And again, I will refer you back to that comparison document that I've written for you to go through the nitty gritty of that. For me, the biggest difference is biomechanics. The sort of the second differences that I've really picked out are in that societal, sport, society, social, cultural stuff. So the depth is significantly different in the different topic areas, but the topic areas themselves are actually the same. I think in general we can say that the qualifications are quite homogenous. They're quite similar, but there are some significant differences. And this, I mean, it's leading into the idea of best practice. So I'm going to sort of just change my color. But for me, this is really important that we talk about this. Students need to be providing for their teachers. When I say providing, you know, it should be generated for the teacher, not by the teacher. There should be live volatile data constantly. You know, this idea of, you know, with this range of theory, with this depth range of theory that we're talking about, the broader qualification, AS, and maybe it's slightly lighter at the A level if the student's successful at AS, then we've got to have live data constantly coming out of the learning experience, telling us, informing us and the student how that student is progressing within that environment. Because if we just kind of leave it and deliver our material and gradually, you know, bit by bit, topic 1 in week 1, topic 2 in week 2, gradually, bit by bit, throw our information out there, I'm only judging myself and my teaching, by the way, nobody else, then I think we're going to get to a point where we get to a scenario where we realize there's a lot of making up to do, and with the breadth of this qualification, that's going to be very difficult to do. So we need to be able to spot when students aren't mastering topic areas, aren't mastering skills, aren't mastering behaviors constantly. And I think systems that people need to put in place for this course need to reflect that. And I'll talk about a bit more about that in a moment. And I am just going to sort of smash through this and keep going because I want to leave some time for question and answers. And my last sort of section here is on sort of best practice, at least in my opinion, with regard to the theory. So, first of all, I've said it already, you guys need to get onto that document that I've written and you need to do a comparison of content. Now, I really don't believe, and I'm going to write this in here, do not expect to teach what you've always taught. I don't know why I'm stumbling over my words so much this evening. I apologize. Do not expect to teach what you've always taught. There will be elements that are familiar, but there's a lot of stuff in there. So, you know, we've got to have an open mind to that. It's hard to say one thing and write another, by the way. So don't expect to see what you've always taught. There are differences. Yes, if you're a whiz kid on energy systems and biomechanics, yeah, there's that stuff remains pretty similar, but there's a lot of new stuff in there as well. Have a good look at that and be prepared for change and be prepared to plan for change. This one, again, it's a little bit personal to me. We've got to get away from the idea of the delivery model. Okay, challenge the delivery model. You know, if we're in a situation where we've got this amount of breadth of content and we're going to do that effectively sort of in a one-pace-fits-all classroom, you know, all students moving through the content roughly at the same pace, we shouldn't be surprised at some point down the line that if students are moving on, whether they've mastered that content or not, we shouldn't be surprised that students become unstuck as they move through. We should be looking at a mastery model of learning within our A levels. And I can talk to anyone about that in detail if you're interested. My email's at the top right at the start, and I'd be really interested to talk to you about that. I want to say that my personal advice is that AS exam in year 1 should happen. Now, I can't tell you that you should enter all your students for an AS exam as a formal external exam. You might do that as a mock experience, but that has to be done, in my opinion, for you to really gauge where the students are. And we're talking about that in 1 year, aren't we? I mean, you know, that you should have a lot more data coming through from the students in terms of how they're progressing in their learning. A couple of other points. We must, as I said before, have this live volatile data. This idea of just end of unit tests, only the odd homework, only the odd piece of extended writing informing where the students are is not good enough. We need to think about this notion of constant live volatile data showing us the very moments when a student starts to struggle, not just some weeks or months later when the outcome of that has become hard to actually improve and get back. I also, as I said a moment ago, I really think colleagues need to think seriously about embedding theory in practical. I think there's a great opportunity to do more of this. I don't know how broad that's going to be, but I really think we should try and achieve that as much as we can. And I mentioned this a lot when we did the GCSE stuff. And I want you to think about an extended writing approach. Okay. Now, when I say that, I'm not saying that all heads of department are responsible for doing an extended writing program for all of the PE students. This, for me, should be a school issue or a whole college issue. Has the school, has the college got a formal approach to how extended writing is going to be developed in that school? For me, it shouldn't be left to the heads of department. For me, it shouldn't be left for the different subject managers. It should be a whole school approach. Now, that's not to say that all departments will do it the same, but there should be those skills being developed systematically by the whole school, by the SLT, by the senior leadership throughout the school, throughout the college. Okay, I'm going to come back into the webinar room and try and pick up on some chat. I do apologise that I've done so little interaction with you this evening. I wasn't actually expecting to do that, to be honest, but you know, these are new ideas and I'm pretty new to it, and we'll go from there. All right, so let me see what I can pick up from here. So we've got, yeah, let's see what questions we've got here. Yes, Josh, that's right for AQA, 1 exam in AS and 2 A2. Yeah, anyway, fire your questions away in there. While those come in, I'm gonna make a couple of points that are important to me. I made the point there about live volatile data. I want to explain to you what I mean by that. For me, I've worked in many systems in education where there's a tendency for a student who's kind of making progress like this to stop making progress, to fall a long way, and then the data picks them up far too late. The data picks them up when there's like a disastrous level of dysfunctionality and a failure in their own mind that stops them from being able to pick it back up, to catch up, to do what they need to do to get back to where they are. And for me, the key to data tracking is that if students are doing this and constantly growing, you need to find the moment where they stop moving up, the very moment, the day, the second that student stops making that progress. That's what I mean by live volatile data tracking. Now, in clever systems, that doesn't give the teacher more work, it gives the teacher less work. It gives them more time to actually intervene based on that data. And if people want to talk to me about that, I'll happily talk to you about that. But that is really important for me, that we've got to get away, I think, within this new course structure. And I'm not suggesting anyone in here is doing this, but I think it's general across education. And I think I've seen it a lot in education from my own experiences. I think we've got to get away from the idea that we deliver a topic in week 1, we deliver a topic in week 2, we deliver a topic in week 3. And no matter where the students are, we carry on with our delivery. We should be allowing the opportunity for students to actually stay where they need to do to master those areas of content, those skills, those behaviors, and then build confidence and skill and behavior from there. Now, it's not an easy thing to do in a traditional classroom, but it can be done in a more forward-thinking classroom. All right, so let's have a look. Josh, James, in your opinion, what board would you go for? I'll tell you which one I would go for, Josh. I would go for OCR, but it will not be the same answer as everyone else, because the motivation for me is because I only have to think about myself at the moment. I feel very confident with my biomechanics, and I would make that a structural advantage within my teaching, within that OCR course. Maybe that would be different to the school that was down the road. So that would be my decision. Now, that's very different, I think, for a colleague or a school that doesn't have that background within their department. You need to think about a different decision. But I was very interested in the AQA coursework. I thought that was very exciting, actually, the way they've written that. So that would be another tempter for me. I like that. For me, Edexcel, Pearson's a bigger player at the moment than it was before. I think they've done a decent job in writing their specification. I do personally, I like the fact that Edexcel has got more extended writing within their work, because I find it more differentiating between student performance levels. So for me, I like that, and I would be looking to really develop that systematically. So that would tempt me towards Edexcel, but I'm assuming OCR will do more extended writing once they get their course approved. So that might be equalized somewhat. But if you sort of held a gun to my head, I would go for OCR because of that biomechanics sort of consideration. But that, of course, is different for different people. Sue Stroud, nice to see you, Sue, by the way. Please don't let the biomechanics put you off. I agree with you. For me, the fact that more people don't make the most of that biomechanics is crazy. In my teaching, where I've done most of my sixth form teaching, we made a real art of biomechanics, and it can give you a real structural advantage. So at least it could before. I can't say it will in the future. I agree with you, Sue. It definitely shouldn't put people off. It's concise. Students kind of get it more as like realization. It's more sort of eureka moments. It's more conceptual. I think it's a good course. I agree with you. So Nicola Mullins, I think I'm going to struggle to teach 7 units in 1 year with same amounts of lessons I have now. Yeah, I think 2 things. I agree. That's the first one. I do think you need to think about that. Secondly, are you thinking about that as a teacher at the front of the room delivering information and the students doing some worksheets and past paper questions? And if you are, my question would be, why is that the delivery model? It doesn't need to be. And again, if you want to talk to me more about that, I wouldn't do it that way, because it is very time heavy. There's very little evidence to suggest that transmission lectures are very good for intuitive, deep learning to take place, which is presumably what we want our students to do. And of course, it takes up the teacher's time a great deal. So I would encourage you, and I'm happy to have a conversation with you about that, to reflect on that. From Steve May. Okay, I think you're answering a question for someone there. Tom Shepard, thanks for all the spreadsheets. We are with AQA, and we are likely to stay with AQA. Well, on that note, Tom, what I'm going to do, folks, is I'm going to put a poll out to you. So I'm going to click Start Poll in a second, and it's one question. I'm going to read it to you now. Which awarding body are you inclined to choose for your A-level from 2016 at the moment? So if you were choosing today, what would you choose? So I'm just going to put that poll out to you. It's going to appear for you right now. If colleagues could just give their inclination, no one's going to hold you to it, but if you put your choices in there, and then I'll let people know what the answers are. I've had a nightmare today. I don't know why, but I'm really struggling to like speak fluently. I hope it hasn't been too bad. So yeah, anyway, there's only 14 gone in, so if you do have the opportunity, do put your opinion into that poll, please. Okay, folks, it would be really nice. I'll share the results with that in a moment. I'll give that a few moments. One other thing I'm going to do for you as well, guys, is I'm going to also show something else up on the screen for you, okay? So I'm going to put on the screen a little offer I've got for you. By the way, this is not a commercial offer. I'm not trying to sell you anything. In 2 weeks' time, I'm doing another webinar, which has got nothing to do with A-levels and GCSE specifically, but it's to do with classroom skills. So I'm going to pop that up on the screen for you now. It's called Increasing Student Activity in the Classroom. It's in 2 weeks' time. Hopefully you can see it. If you have a click on that, and you can just post yourself onto a seat, and it's going to be a good, we're literally going to do 7 activities that could increase student productivity and activity within your classroom. So, by the way, it's genuinely free. The reason I do that, and the reason it's free, is because I think it's really important we have a community of people who are sharing ideas, who are sharing skills. I get very frustrated in teaching because we have a scenario, I think, where the vast majority of development and training, and let's call it inset loosely, comes when somebody chooses to come and watch your lesson, or when someone puts a day on for you, which is kind of like an inset day. And I think those moments are good, but that shouldn't be the only thing we have available to us. We should have constantly available CPD that we choose and we direct our way through. And I'm just trying to contribute to that. So yeah, if you're interested in that, just have a little click. It's totally free, and I'll happily develop those ideas with you. So that will be good. So I'm going to go back onto the chat a moment. So where are we? I saw a big message from Kate McDonald. We are with OCR, but consider AQA move. A&P is a real strength of ours, but biomechanics is not an option we have ever explored at A2, nor do we deliver ex-phys. This feels a little concerning for us. I've always been put off by the AQA coursework, but if you're saying it has been improved, that feels tempting. I can only give you my opinions, Kate, and I don't want to sway people, right? That's not my intention. By the way, I have no affiliation to AQA, no affiliation to OCR. Literally a guy, as you can see, in a bedroom. I understand what you're saying there. I would really encourage you, nothing to do with OCR, by the way, I would really encourage you to think about biomechanics and physiology, because I think it'd be good for your students. And there are biomechanics and physiology, obviously, on the other courses as well you have to do, including on AQA. The biomechanics isn't as rigorous with OCR, as with OCR, that is true. But I think you need to be, a little bit careful with that, Kate. You might be missing out on a really good opportunity there with that biomechanics. So just be aware of it. Again, not trying to sell you OCR, but just be aware of it. I think you just have a think about it. I do like the AQA coursework, having said that. Scott Freewell, I don't know if I'm my eyesight. Friswell, thinking your ideas about students gaining mastery knowledge is excellent. Would be interesting to see how you'll go about delivering this model. More than happy to talk to you about that. Drop me an email and I'll go over that with you. It's james@mypeexam.org. Look, on that, I'm very frustrated in education because I see this dominant traditional model of deliver this, deliver this, deliver this. And I'm not judging anyone. If I'm judging anyone, I'm judging myself and my teaching. And what I've done over the last 17 years as a teacher, the vast majority of the experience I've gone through with students has been to deliver material for them. And I just don't think it works that well. So also, like mastery model, it's just how human beings learn, that you have the opportunity to go forward, to go back, to stick on basic concepts until you really understand them, and then you move on at an individual pace and rhythm. It's perfectly achievable. It's perfect. I've been doing it for a few years now, and it works. It's worked for me and the students I've worked with. And I'd really encourage you to have a think about that. And I'll happily talk to you about it. From James Hewitt, my school is looking at the option of joining year 12 and 13 together due to low numbers and teaching them together each year. Do the new spec syllabus? I'm not sure I completely understand the question. So does that mean that year 12 and 13 will both be in the same classroom and you're teaching the same? I'm just trying to think how that would work. I mean, presumably you would have development of different theory within the classroom, which, by the way, is the model that I work with, nothing to do with year groups, but you can do it. But obviously what you can't do is split yourself into two and deliver two different things at the same time. It's achievable. I'll happily talk to you about that model. It feels a little bit threatening as well, though. Emma Frost, hi Emma, how are you? We only have 3.75 hours a week. Will we fit the AS course in? It'll be tight. Again, it depends whether you're talking about delivering it or providing the classroom everywhere, so the students are developing it themselves, or the students are, it's a learning model or a delivery model. To deliver all that content in that amount of time, I agree with you, it might be a struggle. But it depends on the model of learning that you put in place, I think. And obviously we work with each other anyway, and you probably know the context of which I talk to you about that. Jack Costello, hi Jack, nice to see you as well. We currently teach one OCR unit per teacher in AS and A2. How do you think the new spec lends itself to the divide between staff and units? Yeah, good question. I mean, if you look down those theory content lists, some of those are long lists, aren't they? You know, it's going to be much harder, in my opinion, to say, right, this teacher skill acquisition, this teacher A&P, this teacher sociocultural, this teacher history, this teacher phys. That is less easy to achieve, but all of that content is still in there. So presumably the way to do that is you're going to segment it up and deliver it by those teacher specialists within those areas, unless you literally throw that model out and start again. But I think that's the way most schools is going to do that in reality. Going to chunk up that material and do it that way within those 7 topic headings. I think that's the way it's going to work. Where are we? So yes, Andrew Ricard, mastery model, very interesting. This sounds like another webinar. Do you know what? I very nearly posted that webinar today. I will do that. That's a promise, Andrew. I don't know whether it'll be before Christmas or not, but I'll happily put that one on. I love talking about that model, so yeah, why not? Charlotte Davis, got to love flip learning. Only the realistic way, the only realistic way forward. I've done a lot of flip learning in my time, Charlotte, and I actually did a flip learning webinar previous a few weeks back, which is the recordings out there if anybody wants it. the thing I always say about flipped learning is it's a good tool. It's not a learning model. So for me, it's the equivalent of a brilliant questioning technique, a brilliant group work activity. If you do flipped learning all the time, I've heard lots of things like flipped learning departments, this sort of thing. I'm not convinced by that. But obviously people have got different opinions. For me, flipped learning is one step on a journey towards blended or humanistic learning, which I'd really encourage you to read about and to investigate. And I'll happily talk to you about it if you're interested. But it's a good tool. I agree with that. Chris Pearson, more information. Right, I need to do a webinar on this mastery thing, don't I? Right, I'm going to do that, and I promise I will do that for you. Okay, so I will post that out to everyone who's been in here. I can't say I'm going to have it set up in the next few days, but within a reasonable time period, I'll get that done. Again, Kate McDonald, same point. Yeah, I'll talk to people about that. I heard, so Geordie Swanborough, I heard the AS is binned if students choose to complete their A level. If so, I can't see my school doing AS. I think that means no. AS is a discrete qualification. One thing I would say about the AS A level sort of continuation issue is that if students nail the AS course in the first year and get that qualification, and then they move on to convert it into the A level, remember A2's gone, but to the A level, then the A level year, the second year, might feel quite light in terms of content because a lot of the content is done in the AS qualification. But the advantage of that, of course, is that if students have experienced that exam in, let's say, 2017 as an AS, and then they go on to 2018 to do their A level, they are going to be repeating some of those topic areas that they've been assessed on, presumably because those same topic areas can come up in the A level. So that in itself is an advantage. Now, I'm not suggesting they'll have the same questions on both papers one year after the other, but the topics are in there. They're the same topics. There's overlap. So therefore, well, there's huge overlap. So therefore, that might be an advantage for people as well. But no, AS is definitely a course, and many students will do it that way. AS in year one, huge challenge that's going to be, I think, to get that course done in year one, and then centres will convert it to a second year course. All right, I am going to go back to the poll and tell you the results. So let me stop the poll now. So results that we have AQA received 22 votes, Edexcel Pearson received 6, Educast WJC, bless them, got none, and OCR was the leader with 29. So it appears that OCR, at least in our webinar space this evening, is the most popular of those. So it comes in with OCR and AQA way out in front, Pearson behind with fewer. Now that actually replicates the current scenario of awarding bodies within the current, and I hate the fact it's a marketplace, but marketplace, why qualifications are within these commercial structures. Anyway, I'm not going to go down on that one. But yeah, so OCR is the leading one within the room tonight, which is quite interesting. AQA pretty close second in there as well. So a couple of final things for me. I'm just going to try and answer any last chat points I can before we finish off. Andrew Tanner, what about high and narrow theory grade thresholds? That's been a problem in the past on a number of the awarding bodies. I'm assuming that's going to improve in the future with the broader specifications, with more exams, and the fact that we've got more raw marks involved. So I'm hoping that the threshold, the boundaries will be broader. And that's why I said a moment ago as well, I quite like that Edexcel have got more extended writing because it's more differentiating. And therefore, I think that's an advantage and a truer reflection, assuming it's marked well, a truer reflection of student performance. So I think it's the same part, it's part of the same consideration. Don't forget the poll, James. No, I haven't, Andrew. Thank you. I think I found 2 hours for science and hour each for psych, but okay. I'm not too sure what you're referring to there, Simon, so I won't comment on that. James, can you poll where people are thinking of going to? Steve, I'm assuming you've just seen that, so we just answered that. OCR was the most popular, AQA second, Edexcel significantly in third. Josh Clayman, do we still think Edexcel GCSE lends itself to OCR A level? That's the most popular combination at the moment. I mean, I've been working on the Edexcel GCSE for 2016 in the last few days and the OCR A level. I think, yeah, basically, yeah. I mean, you've got more current A-level content gone back into the Edexcel GCSE, so there's more of that there. But yeah, I think generally, if you did the GCSE webinar with me a few weeks ago, the GCSE that I feel best prepares students for the A-levels we're talking about here is the IGCSE. Now, many schools won't have the choice to do that because it won't feature in league tables, but it's a very A-level-y type qualification. So, it might be worth having a look at that if you've got GCSEs and you've got like a real free reign to make whatever decisions you want to. Thanks, Lisa. It's a nice comment. Lots of great information and plenty to think about. I'm not very happy with what I did tonight because I stumbled over my words so much. But look, the thing for me, right, is that we've got a load of people in here together talking about really important things for us and our working context, and it's completely open source, right? Where is that objective information? Why is it us that has got to do that? Why has it got to be some lunatic like me in his elder daughter's bedroom putting a webinar on so we actually have a conversation about this? I think we've been really hampered in the structures and the support we've got because it isn't available to us, so we've got to make it ourselves, and that's what I'm going to try and achieve within these sort of sessions. So that's what I'm sort of trying to do, so it's a shame it has to be done that way, really, but it has. And then you add to that it is a marketplace for qualifications, and ethically and philosophically that provokes certain issues. Right, last couple of points and we are going to finish soon. Chris Pearson, we have a CPD session for OCR New Spec with Dice Elliott, Ripley, St Thomas, Lancaster. Oh, they're good plug that. So if you're in that area, December the 1st, if anyone's interested, it might be good to get along to that. Di is obviously very good at presenting. I've known her for a little while. Yeah, I agree with you, Josh. Long answer in Edexcel. Yeah, it is a long answer in Edexcel. Might prepare students better. Which GCSE spec lends best to A-level? I think the IGCSE, Lauren. Arguably the Edexcel is also quite rigorous as well, so you could think about that. My pleasure, Kate, no problem at all. Thank you for all your Nicola, mine's I need a drink. Yeah, me too, and I'm definitely going to get my feet up for a little while. By the way, I will be on Twitter at the end of this. I don't if anyone's using Twitter, my handle's @mypeexam. Do feel free to drop me a message. I will be sort of keeping an eye on that for the rest of the evening, probably for the next hour or so at least. And yeah, look, thank you so much to you all. I am going to stop the broadcast. Have a tremendous evening. You've got my email. If anybody wants to discuss things with me, I'm more than happy to have that conversation. I'll do my very, very best to support people in the best way I can. And I'm going to go and regret all that stumbling over my vocabulary. Take care.